Hello, strong soul. Great to see you in another moment of the now. Thank you for joining. Today, the transmission that we are exploring is what is trauma. So, remember, this is just a perspective where we share different blueprints in order to comprehend life from a simpler standpoint, ideally, and keep evolving our soul and thriving. So, trauma from a metaphysical perspective is something that happens in your life that probably takes you off guard, way beyond your means, threatens your livelihood in some way or another, whether it's psychological, physical, or like mental, spiritual, emotional, and is it impacts you in a way that is larger than you can process, right? Like a file, like when you try to attach a file or send a file, and it's beyond the capacity, it's beyond your capacity to process, right? So what happens is that when trauma strikes you from a vibrational, from an energetic standpoint, what happens is the body tries to cope in order to survive in the shortest span of time while wrapping that experience, that situation, that process, that trauma in a bubble. And that is like stored in some way in your subconscious. It's like it can play different parts there in the subconscious, in the unconscious. It can also go into the biological unconscious where people develop mystery illnesses after a trauma. Is like depending on how much energy there is and how intense the trauma is, it can impact you, whether it's in the rational, emotional, or physical unconscious, right? So, trauma is an impactful experience that threatens your life to some degree. And this experience is way beyond your capacity of processing, right? Like if you can process, um, your bandwidth is up to 10, and then trauma is something beyond 10. It's like beyond your capacity to process. And that's why kids are more susceptible to trauma, because they're still developing, right? So when something is bigger than their capacity to process, the leftover, if you may, or the excess begins to get stored, whether it's in the emotional unconscious, the physical unconscious, or even the mental unconscious, right? Like overthinkers are out there when they get into very extreme, intense, borderline like obsessive overthinking, is because probably as children they had to grow up very quickly. They have to solve things for their own selves at a certain point, and they had to learn how to rely on themselves. So they overdevelop their rational capacity to rationalize or philosophize, why is this happening to me? How do I organize it? How do I prevent this from taking me over the next time, right? Same thing happens with emotional abuse. We can become overly sensitive and project a lot and be very defensive and be very evasive or distant, or the opposite. Everybody, like I said, these are just pointers because everybody develops or is impacted by trauma differently. The make of the person, if you may, will determine how the trauma impacts that person. And also, trauma can impact you physically, right? And create some sort of handicap or some sort of limitations that maybe have no explanation. And these people are just paralyzed, or they just lost the capacity to do this or even speak, right? Like trauma can impact you in different ways because every person has different weak points, has different vulnerabilities. So the symptoms or the trauma will stick to those weak points. For example, if in the family there's a tendency for certain types of behaviors and they develop certain physical conditions, and there's like proclivity to digestive issues, you're more prone to developing a digestive issue after a trauma than some other condition. Um, Again, I want to keep it general so that we can each take what resonates, but I did want to expand a little bit on what trauma is, to begin to break down the taboo and begin to take charge and understand that trauma is unprocessed, unresolved energy. Energy is information, and this energy usually is in motion, emotions, right? It's usually stored as sensations or feelings that are uncomfortable, right? So let's say that I had a trauma back in the day that I can't remember, but it had something to do with the family system. And then whenever that situation plays out in my life, whether it's at work or with family or in any other aspect of my life, this trauma may play out unconsciously. It's trying to protect me, right? But when I sit down and I generate a higher capacity to process myself and my experiences, I can incorporate that trauma consciously. I don't necessarily have to remember what happened because the energy is stuck right now in the body, right? So, in the measure that I develop existential courage to face myself and face my discomfort, I allow myself to process that, which was not safe to process back in the day when the trauma struck, right? The trauma struck me so hard, I couldn't process. It went into the back end, and then it's just been stored there, holding back my flow and the power of my energy. And then once I take charge of that, it's like, okay, I'm ready to pay the bill. I don't know what the expense was. It doesn't really matter. The point is that there's a bill due, there's energy due to be processed. And that's trauma. It's unresolved energy. And ideally, here, you gather the tools or gather the support of somebody experienced, right? That can help you create that container, that safe space. Like I said, you can create that safe space for yourself, or you can get guidance and assistance in order to do so. And that's how we eventually begin to heal trauma. Sometimes you can heal it instantly, and sometimes it's a process. Everybody has different lessons, right? Everybody is going through a different undergrad here on Earth. So that's a little bit of a recap on what is a trauma. And in these, with this idea, I just want to let you know that you have what it takes to process the energies that have impacted you. A lot of the times, trauma is outside of our control, right? Nobody's saying that we deserve what we went through. But if we've gone through that, the sovereign thing to do is to take charge instead of passing it on, right? Hurt people. And at some point, we come in, we're a cycle breaker, we take charge, and we decide to heal so that we can stop passing on the pain. So I commend you for the work and the dedication. Please feel free to start a conversation below. If there's any advice that you could share with the community, or if there's anything that you would like to ask, and we can further explore the inquiries. Again, thank you so much for your presence. And as for me, I will see you in another moment of the now.